palms were sweaty when I unlocked my phone that morning. I remember the exact moment, standing in the parking garage at work, engine still running, because I had this nagging feeling I couldn't shake the whole drive in. I opened the banking app. I do this every few days, just to have it. Nothing dramatic, just checking. The number made no sense. I actually laughed, out loud by myself, in a parking garage at 7:42 in the morning, because my brain refused to process what it was seeing. I refreshed. Same number. I scrolled to the transaction history and the laugh died somewhere in my chest. $41,800 gone. Over 11 days. While I was in Phoenix. Let me back up. My name is not important. What's important is that I'm 31 years old. I work in logistics management for a mid-sized freight company out of Columbus, Ohio. And for the last 6 years, I have been careful. Deliberately, almost obsessively careful with money. That came from watching my parents operate the way they did. Spending before earning, borrowing from neighbors, treating every windfall like an excuse to celebrate instead of a reason to stabilize. I swore to myself at 23 that I was going to be different. And I was. I had just over $44,000 in savings. That took 4 years. My brother had been staying with me since March. He showed up at my door on a Tuesday night with 2 duffel bags and a story about his landlord that changed slightly every time he told it. By the third version, I stopped asking follow-up questions. He was my brother. He needed a place. I had a second bedroom that I used as an office. I cleared out the desk and bought an actual bed frame and told him 3 months maximum while he got back on his feet. He's 36. He'd been laid off from his sales job. That part was true. I verified it. The rest I should have pressed harder on. But I didn't, because he's my brother, and I wanted to believe him. And there's something that happens when someone you grew up with stands at your door looking like they've been deflated. You just open the door. He was a good house guest at first, kept things clean, cooked sometimes, stayed out of my way. I'd come home from work and we'd eat together and watch something, and it felt almost like being kids again, minus the tension that used to live in our parents' house. I genuinely thought, that maybe this was us finally becoming real brothers as adults, the kind who actually like each other. I left for Phoenix on a Monday in late April. 3-week trip, we were onboarding a new regional partner, and I was the lead on the account. It was the biggest project I'd been assigned. I was focused, excited even. I told my brother before I left, the rent is covered through May. Groceries are stocked. Here's my Venmo if there's a real emergency. Real emergency. I said that twice. He nodded and told me to kill it in Phoenix. The first 2 weeks were fine. We texted occasionally. He sent me a photo of a meal he made. I sent him back a thumbs up and went back to 17-hour days. I didn't check my banking app once during that stretch. I never needed to. Nothing should have been touching that account. All my bills were on auto pay from my checking account, which was separate. The savings account existed for one reason, to eventually become a down payment on a house. It was the 3rd week when the feeling started. I can't explain it logically. Nothing specific triggered it. I was eating a sad hotel breakfast on a Wednesday when this low-grade rawness just settled into my body. I pushed it away, told myself I was tired, called my girlfriend that night. She's in Cincinnati. We'd been long distance for about 8 months, and she said I seemed off. I said I was just ready to come home. 2 days before I was supposed to fly back, I got a text from my brother. Hey, just so you know, the kitchen faucet started dripping. Didn't want you to be surprised. A dripping faucet. I read it 4 times. Why was he in the kitchen at my apartment and texting me about a faucet when I was landing in 48 hours? Why not just call the building super? Why text me at all? I don't know why that specific text made me open the banking app. But I did. And that's when I sat in a parking garage and laughed and then stopped laughing. $41,800 moved in transfers over 11 days. The transfers were made from a laptop. My laptop, which I had left at the apartment because I used my work machine in Phoenix and didn't think twice about leaving it behind. My savings account was linked to my checking account on that laptop for easy transfers. I had never needed to transfer anything in 4 years. There was no reason I thought to revoke that access before I left. I sat there for a long time. Then I called my girlfriend. She answered on the second ring and I told her very quietly what I was looking at. She was silent for a second and then said, "Don't call him yet. Don't do anything yet. Come home first." She was right. I know she was right. But I want to be honest about what those 48 hours felt like. Flying home knowing what I knew. Sitting next to strangers on a plane, watching a movie I didn't see a single frame of, landing in Columbus at 9 p.m., and taking a lift back to my own apartment where my brother was sitting on my couch, watching television like nothing had shifted in the world. He looked up when I came in. "Hey, welcome back," he said. "You look tired." "Yeah," I said. "Long flight." I went to my bedroom and closed the door. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed and I went through every transfer in the app, screenshot by screenshot, and I tried to build the picture. 11 days. The transfers range from $2,000 to $8,000. Some days there were two. They went to accounts I didn't recognize, which I would later learn were his. A secondary checking account he'd opened at a different bank, and a prepaid card he used for what the police detective would describe to me as lifestyle expenses. I want to be precise about what I felt that night, because I think it matters. It wasn't rage. I expected rage. What it actually was grief. The specific grief of realizing that someone you've known your entire life has been looking at you as a resource this whole time and you just never noticed, or didn't want to. The next morning, I got up early. I made coffee. My brother was still asleep. I drove to my bank when they opened at 9 and I sat down with a branch manager named Wendell, older guy, reading glasses on a chain, the kind of person who makes you feel like things can be handled. And I explained what I was seeing. He pulled up the account history. The transfers had been initiated from a saved device, my laptop using saved credentials. Technically, from the bank's perspective, authorized access. Wendell looked at me over those reading glasses and said, "You're going to want to talk to the fraud department and you're probably going to want to file a police report." I nodded. "Do you know who did it?" I said yes. He didn't say anything to that, just started writing down numbers for me to call. I drove home. My brother was awake, eating cereal at the kitchen table, scrolling his phone. He looked up. "You went out early," he said. "Yeah." I set my keys down. "I need to ask you something." Something moved across his face, quick, like a fish underwater, and then his expression settled back into neutral. "Sure, what's up?" "Did you transfer money from my savings account while I was in Phoenix?" He blinked. "What?" "I need you to just answer the question." "Man, why would I?" "Because $41,000 is gone and the transfers came from my laptop while I was away for 3 weeks. He put the spoon down. He didn't say anything for a long moment, and then he did something I still think about. He looked down at the table and he said, very quietly, "I was going to pay it back. I had a plan." I've replayed that sentence hundreds of times. Not "I didn't do it," not "what are you talking about?" Straight to, "I was going to pay it back," like the theft itself wasn't worth defending. Like the question was only about the timeline. "A plan," I said. "I've been dealing with some stuff. It got out of hand. I was going to tell you when you got back and I had more of it sorted." "What stuff?" He didn't answer that directly. What came out instead was a meandering explanation involving a business idea, some investments that went sideways, a person he owed money to. The story had the shape of something true and the texture of something heavily edited. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. And then I said, "I'm filing a police report today." His head came up fast. "You're my brother." "I know. You're going to call the cops on your own brother over money. And here's the part I want anyone reading this to sit with, because I've talked to a lot of people since this happened, and this is where almost everyone says they would have hesitated. He wasn't wrong that it was money. He wasn't wrong that he was my brother. Both of those things were true. The third thing that was also true was that he had taken $41,000 that I had spent 4 years building, dollar by careful dollar, while I trusted him enough to sleep in my spare bedroom. "Yes," I said. "I called my parents that afternoon, not because I owed them the courtesy, but because I wanted them to hear it from me, before my brother called them with his version." My father answered. I explained what happened. I told him I'd been to the bank. I had documentation. I was filing a report. My father said, "He's your brother. You handle this in the family." I said, "He took $41,000. My father said, "You've always had more than you needed. You don't even own a house yet. What were you saving for?" I've thought about that sentence every day since. You've always had more than you needed. My savings account, built through 4 years of deliberate choices, refusal to overspend, skipped vacations, driving a car with 140,000 miles on it, interpreted by my own father as excess, as available. I didn't argue. I said, "I'm handling it the way I need to handle it." My mother called me 20 minutes later. She cried. She said I was destroying the family. She said my brother had problems I didn't understand. She said if I went through with this, I would regret it. I said I love you. I'll talk to you when this is over. I filed a report that evening at the Columbus Division of Police. The detective assigned to my case, a woman in her late 40s with a very flat affect and a methodical way of asking questions that I found genuinely comforting, told me that because the transfers were made from a saved device with saved credentials, the bank had limited liability. The civil and criminal angles were separate tracks. She said the criminal track was viable because of the amounts involved in the evidence pattern. Evidence pattern, I repeated. She explained. The transfers clustered around specific times of day, always when I would have been in meetings based on my work calendar, which synced to my laptop, never on weekends when I might have checked the app. Whoever did this, she said carefully, was paying attention. I gave her his name. I gave her the device documentation from the bank. I gave her screenshots of our text exchanges, including the faucet text, which she found interesting. She said she'd be in touch. What followed was 6 weeks that I will not pretend were easy. My brother moved out 3 days after I filed the report. He didn't say goodbye. He texted me one line, "Can't believe you did this." I saved it with everything else. My parents stopped talking to me for most of that period. My mother sent occasional single-line texts, "Still think about you?" which I didn't know how to interpret and eventually just left unread. My father didn't contact me at all. I found out through a mutual family friend that my brother had told them a version of events in which I had driven him to desperate measures through years of flaunting my financial stability. I want to be clear, I drive a car with 140,000 miles on it and I eat lunch at my desk. There's no version of my life that involves flaunting. My girlfriend drove up from Cincinnati the weekend after I filed the report and stayed for 4 days. She didn't try to fix anything. She just came and sat with me and ate takeout and watched television and let me talk when I needed to and was quiet when I needed that instead. I think about those 4 days often. The criminal case moved slowly. My brother was eventually charged. The amounts were significant enough that it crossed into felony territory. His lawyer argued it was a civil matter between family members with informal financial arrangements. The detective's documentation of the transfer timing, the saved device, and the secondary accounts he'd opened were not easy to argue around. The civil case, which I filed separately with a lawyer my girlfriend's father recommended, ran parallel. My lawyer was direct with me from the beginning. I would likely recover some, not all. The money had been moved and spent. There was no pot of 41,000 sitting somewhere waiting to be returned. I decided I was okay with that, or I decided to act like I was okay with it until I actually was. There was a mediation session in August. My brother showed up with his lawyer and my parents came too, which I hadn't expected. Nobody warned me. I walked into the room and there they were. My father in the same sport coat he wore to every important occasion. My mother with her hands folded in her lap and my brother, who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. My father spoke before anyone asked him to. He said the family wanted to resolve this privately and move forward. The mediator, a quiet man with wire-framed glasses, who I suspected had seen everything, said, "We can speak to that in a moment. First, the parties. What came out of mediation was a structured repayment agreement. My brother would pay back $26,000 over 36 months. It wasn't everything. It wasn't nothing. It was documented, signed, legally binding. My father shook my hand afterward in the hallway and said, "I hope you can find a way to forgive." I looked at him for a moment. "I'm working on it," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean what you think it means." He didn't have an answer for that. My girlfriend moved to Columbus in September. That had been the plan before any of this happened. We'd been talking about it since January. But I think going through this together accelerated something in how we understood each other. She found a position at a hospital system downtown. We are not talking about this experience as a silver lining. It wasn't one. But she is here, and that's real. I changed the savings account. New bank entirely. Two-factor authentication on everything. No saved credentials on any shared device. A password manager my brother definitely does not have access to. I've been asked, by people who found out what happened, whether I feel stupid for not having done those things before. I thought about that question a lot. Here's what I've landed on. I wasn't careless. I was trusting. Those are not the same thing. Careless means you didn't think. I just thought about the wrong person. I thought about my brother the way you think about someone you've known your whole life. which means I extended a category of trust that he hadn't actually earned as an adult. I extended it because we share parents and a childhood and 23 years of Christmases, and because he stood at my door with 2 duffel bags looking deflated. None of that was stupidity. It was just love operating without enough information. I still don't fully understand what the money went to. Some came out in the court process, gambling, mostly, which explained things I hadn't been able to explain. I didn't know my brother had a gambling problem. I don't know if he knew. That didn't change anything legally. It did change something in how I grieved it, because it stopped being purely about greed and became about a person who had a serious problem and chose to make it my problem without asking. The first repayment came in October, $722. I looked at it in my account for a long time. I called my mother that evening. She picked up and there was a long pause, and then she said, "Hello," in the particular way she does when she doesn't know what she's walking into. I told her I wasn't calling about the case. I wasn't ready to talk about my brother, but I missed her and I wanted to check in. She cried a little. I didn't. We talked for 40 minutes about mostly nothing. Her neighbor's garden, a show she'd been watching, whether I was eating. It was 40 minutes of very ordinary things that I had not realized I'd been missing. I haven't spoken to my father since the handshake in the hallway. I think he is waiting for me to apologize. I've tried to understand for what. I'm not writing this to make anyone feel sorry for me. I'm writing it because I spent 6 months feeling like I was the one who had done something wrong. For trusting, for filing the report, for not handling it in the family. And I want to say clearly, to anyone who has ever been handed that logic, keeping something quiet to protect the family is not the same as protecting yourself. Those are two different things, and someone who loves you should never ask you to confuse them. The money is coming back slowly. My savings account has a number in it again that is growing in the right direction. My girlfriend makes coffee in the mornings now, and that is a thing I did not expect to have this year. There's a phrase I wrote in my journal the night I came home from Phoenix and found my brother on the couch. I thought about it a lot since. The people who take from you quietly are counting on the fact that you love them too much to look. I looked, and I'm still here. If you've been through something like this, or something that rhymes with it, say hi in the comments. Tell me where you're from. You're not alone in this, and you're not wrong for choosing yourself when someone made you choose. I appreciate you being here. If this story meant something to you, consider subscribing to the channel. There are more of these, told carefully, told honestly, told by people who needed someone to finally listen. I've been sitting with this for a while now, trying to figure out what I actually learned. Not the lesson you'd put on a motivational post, but the real one. The kind that sits in your chest and doesn't fully dissolve. Here's what I keep coming back to. What my brother did wasn't random. It didn't happen in a vacuum. He had access because I trusted him. He had time because I was focused elsewhere. He had the nerve to do it because somewhere in his mind, he had already decided that my discipline was available to him. That the gap between his situation and mine was something I owed him the responsibility of closing. That's not a money story. That's a story about what happens when one person's hard choices get reframed by someone else as unfair advantage. I made a decision at 23 to live differently than the way I was raised. That decision cost me things, vacations I didn't take, things I didn't buy, Friday nights I stayed in. Nobody saw that work. What they saw was the number in the account. And my brother, who had watched me make those choices for years without ever really understanding what they required, looked at that number and saw something he was owed. The cause and effect here isn't complicated, even if it's painful. He made a series of choices. The gambling, the debt, the decision to take instead of ask. And those choices had consequences that eventually arrived at his door in the form of a detective and a court date. Not because I was cruel, because that's how things actually work when you strip away the family loyalty that usually insulates people from the results of their own decisions. I stopped being the insulation. That's the whole story. What I had to develop to get through it wasn't anger. Anger came easy. What took real effort was clarity. The ability to look at someone I'd known my entire life and see him accurately, not charitably, not harshly, just accurately. That kind of clear-eyed seeing is harder than it sounds when love is involved. It requires you to hold two things at once. This person matters to me, and this person did something that cannot be excused because they matter to me. Most people can only hold one at a time. I had to learn to hold both, the resilience part, and I use that word carefully because it gets thrown around cheaply. Wasn't in filing the report or sitting through mediation. It was in the 6 weeks between, when my parents weren't speaking to me and my brother had disappeared, and the apartment felt very quiet, and I had to keep going to work and eating and functioning while carrying the weight of something nobody around me wanted to acknowledge. Resilience isn't dramatic, it's just continuing. It's making coffee and driving in and doing the work and not letting the wrongness of what happened become the whole story of who you are. Wendell, the branch manager who looked at me over his reading glasses and quietly wrote down numbers without making me feel stupid for trusting my brother. He did more for me in that 20-minute meeting than most people do with hours of advice. He just helped me take the next step. That's all any of us can do for each other, really. My girlfriend is asleep in the next room right now. The savings account has a real number in it again. The first repayment hit in October, and everyone since has been a small, quiet confirmation that choosing honesty over comfort was the right call. I don't need everyone to understand that. I just needed to be able to live with it. And I can.